He believed control could protect him from pain. She entered his world for reasons she couldn't explain and secrets she couldn't reveal. Neither of them planned to fall. But some connections don't ask for permission before they change everything. Before we begin, subscribing costs nothing, and it helps this channel grow, so we can keep sharing stories like this. Now, let's begin. Jonathan Hale's mornings followed a rhythm that never failed him. Coffee at exactly 6 a.m. Emails before sunrise. A quiet house that stayed quiet, even when it shouldn't. Caleb, his 10-year-old son, moved through the house like someone afraid of disturbing something fragile. Jonathan noticed that. He noticed many things. He just didn't always know what to do with them. The nanny agency sent 3 candidates that week. Jonathan rejected 2 without meeting them. The third arrived on a Tuesday morning, 10 minutes early. "Mr. Hale," his assistant said over the intercom, "Rachel Monroe is here." Jonathan glanced at his watch. "Send her in." Rachel stepped into his office carrying a simple folder and the kind of calm that didn't try to impress anyone. She looked around once, not to admire, but to understand. Jonathan stood. "Rachel Monroe." "Jonathan Hale," she replied evenly. He gestured toward the chair. "Please." She sat, crossing her legs carefully. Not nervously. Carefully. Jonathan opened her resume. "You've worked in education." "Yes." "And caregiving." "Yes. This role is primarily childcare." Rachel smiled slightly. "So is life." Jonathan paused. "Excuse me?" "I mean," she said gently, "children don't separate their feelings by category. They don't say, 'Now I'm being cared for,' or 'Now I'm being educated.' They just notice who shows up." Jonathan leaned back, studying her. "You speak as if you've done this before." "I have," Rachel said, "and I've done it wrong enough times to recognize when something matters." That should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt honest. Before Jonathan could respond, the office door opened a few inches. Caleb's head appeared, messy-haired, cautious. "Dad?" he asked. Jonathan straightened. "Caleb, I'm working." Rachel turned toward the boy and lowered her voice. "Hi." Caleb froze, unsure if he was allowed to answer. "I'm Rachel," she said. "I'm here to talk to your dad. He looks serious, so I assume it's important." Caleb frowned. "He always looks like that." Jonathan cleared his throat. "Caleb." Rachel smiled, not at Jonathan, at Caleb. "Do you like pancakes?" Caleb hesitated. "Yes." "Good," Rachel said, "because I make them badly the first time. It builds character." Caleb stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Jonathan felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't know why. After Caleb left, Jonathan closed the folder. "You're direct." Rachel nodded. "I find it saves time. And yet you applied for a position that requires flexibility." She tilted her head. "Flexibility and dishonesty aren't the same thing." Jonathan studied her again. "Why do you want this job?" Rachel didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted toward the window, toward the street below. "Because," she said finally, "some places feel like intersections, and people pass through them, whether they mean to or not." Jonathan frowned. "That's not an answer." "It's the truest one I have." There was something under her words. Urgency, perhaps, or restraint. Jonathan inhaled slowly. "When can you start?" Rachel looked back at him. "Tomorrow." That night, Rachel stood outside the Hale residence longer than necessary, keys in her hand, staring at the front door as if it might speak first. Her phone vibrated. It was messages from Eli saying, "He pushed me again today." The teacher said to ignore it. Rachel closed her eyes. Her son was learning to disappear quietly, and she refused to let that become his survival skill. The next morning, Rachel arrived early. Jonathan was already awake, dressed, coffee untouched on the counter. Rachel noticed immediately. She poured herself a glass of water. "You don't drink it?" she asked. Jonathan glanced at the mug. "I forget." "That's impressive," Rachel said. "Most people forget names. You forget caffeine." He almost smiled. Almost. Caleb appeared in the doorway, backpack half-zipped. Rachel knelt to his level. "Morning." Caleb studied her. "You're really here." "I am." "For how long?" Rachel hesitated just a fraction. "Long enough." Caleb nodded, accepting this as if it were reasonable. Over the next days, the house changed, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Rachel hummed softly while cooking. Caleb started talking without being prompted. Jonathan began noticing how often he stopped at the stairs, listening. They didn't talk about feelings. They talked about schedules, homework, burnt pancakes. Rachel had a way of responding that caught Jonathan off guard. "You don't have to fix everything," she told him once, when he tried to reorganize Caleb's entire routine in a single afternoon. Jonathan exhaled. "That's literally what I do." "Yes," Rachel said, "but this isn't a company." Something shifted between them then, a quiet recognition. The desire wasn't named. It didn't need to be. It lived in pauses, in glances held too long, in the way Jonathan waited for Rachel's footsteps before leaving his office. The audience already knew something Jonathan didn't. Rachel hadn't chosen this house randomly. She hadn't chosen him randomly. Every smile carried intention. Every kindness carried weight. And the truth was moving closer. The first thing Jonathan noticed was that Caleb stopped flinching. It wasn't dramatic. There was no announcement, no visible turning point. Just small changes that added up quietly, like pennies dropped into a jar no one thought to count. Caleb spoke more at breakfast. He asked questions that didn't sound rehearsed. He lingered in rooms instead of passing through them. Rachel noticed it too, but she didn't celebrate. She observed. She adjusted. She listened. That was her way. One afternoon, Jonathan came home earlier than usual. He expected silence. Instead, he heard laughter. Short, surprised, unguarded. He stopped in the hallway. Caleb was sitting at the kitchen table, his math book open. Rachel stood beside him, arms crossed, studying the page. "That's not wrong," Rachel said. "It's just optimistic." Caleb frowned. "Math can't be optimistic." Rachel leaned closer. "Tell that to my first paycheck." Caleb laughed, then looked at his paper again. "So, I try again?" "Yes," Rachel said. "But this time, don't rush. Numbers don't like to be bullied." Jonathan covered his mouth with his hand. He hadn't heard Caleb laugh like that in months. Rachel looked up and saw him in the doorway. "You're home early," she said. Jonathan nodded. Meeting ended. Caleb glanced between them. "Dad, Rachel says I don't have to be good at everything right away." Jonathan hesitated. "She's right." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Careful? That sounded like agreement." Jonathan exhaled. "I can agree occasionally. I just don't schedule it." Rachel smiled, small but genuine. Humor slipped in like that. Unexpected. Gentle. Never loud enough to demand attention, but impossible to ignore. As days turned into weeks, Jonathan found himself adjusting without realizing it. He stayed for dinner more often. He let Rachel handle mornings without interference. He stopped correcting Caleb mid-sentence. Rachel, meanwhile, learned the shape of Jonathan's silence. She noticed how his jaw tightened when the phone rang too late, how he avoided the hallway near the old guest room, how he paused before entering Caleb's bedroom at night, as if afraid of saying the wrong thing. One evening, she found him standing in the living room, staring at a framed photo on the shelf. Jonathan didn't notice her at first. The woman in the photo was smiling, mid-laugh, frozen in a moment that no longer existed. Rachel said nothing. She didn't apologize for being there. She didn't retreat either. Jonathan spoke without turning around. She hated silence. Rachel nodded, though he couldn't see it. Some people do. She filled rooms, he said. Even when she was quiet. Rachel waited. Silence mattered here. I thought, Jonathan continued, that if I kept everything controlled, Caleb wouldn't feel the absence as much. Rachel spoke softly. Children feel what we don't say louder than what we do. Jonathan closed his eyes. That night, Rachel sat on her bed, phone in hand, rereading old messages from the school. Polite responses, delayed meetings, words like incident and misunderstanding. Her stomach tightened. She had come here for a reason. And the longer she stayed, the harder it became to remember that reason without hurting someone else. At school the next morning, Eli walked beside her, shoulders drawn inward. Did you tell anyone? He asked. Rachel knelt, meeting his eyes. Not yet. Eli nodded, but his relief was fragile. Okay. Rachel kissed his forehead. I promise you, I'm paying attention. Back at the house, Jonathan watched Rachel help Caleb pack his bag for school. Their heads bent close together, their voices low. Something twisted inside him. Not jealousy exactly, but fear. Fear that she belonged here in a way he hadn't planned for. Fear that losing her would feel like losing something he had only just learned to name. That afternoon, Jonathan's phone rang. The school. He stepped outside to take the call. Yes, he said. This is Jonathan Hale. There was a pause. His expression tightened. I understand, he said. No, I wasn't aware. Rachel watched from the window, heart racing. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she knew that tone. The call ended. Jonathan stood still for a long moment before coming back inside. Rachel didn't speak first. She waited. The school wants to schedule a meeting, Jonathan said finally. About behavioral issues. Rachel's chest tightened. Whose? Jonathan looked at her, searching. They didn't say. Yet. The audience already knew. Rachel did. Time was beginning to compress. Truth had weight. And soon, it would have to land somewhere. That evening, Caleb sat at the table, drawing. Rachel, he asked suddenly. Yes? If someone does something wrong, but they think it's right, is it still wrong? Rachel froze. Jonathan looked up. Rachel chose her words carefully. Sometimes people make choices because they're scared. That doesn't make the choice good. But it makes it human. Caleb considered this. Does it mean they have to fix it? Rachel met Jonathan's eyes. Yes. Silence settled, not empty, but heavy with meaning. Jonathan broke it quietly. Tomorrow, I'll go to the school. Rachel's breath caught. You don't have to, she said. Jonathan shook his head. I do. Rachel nodded, hiding the storm behind her calm. Because if Jonathan went, he would get closer to the truth. And she was running out of places to stand. The school hallway smelled like disinfectant and old paper. Jonathan noticed it immediately. He noticed everything when he was uncomfortable. Rachel walked beside him, calm on the outside, counting her steps on the inside. She had imagined this moment too many times. Not like this, not with him so close. The principal's office door was open, voices lowered when they approached. Jonathan stopped just short of the doorway. You don't have to come in, he said. Rachel met his eyes. Yes, I do. That answer settled something and unsettled something else. Inside, the meeting unfolded the way Rachel expected, and the way Jonathan did not. Careful language. soft phrases. Responsibility diluted until no one quite held it. "There have been some misunderstandings," the principal said. "Children are still learning social boundaries," added the counselor. Rachel's hands tightened in her lap. Jonathan listened. At first, he listened like an executive, detached, analytical. Then he noticed Eli. The boy sat in the corner, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on the floor. He was not disruptive. He was not loud. He was trying to take up less space than his body required. Jonathan felt something shift. "When did this start?" he asked. The principal hesitated. "It's hard to say." Jonathan leaned forward. "No, it's not. Someone knows." The room went quiet. Rachel stared straight ahead. She did not look at Jonathan. She did not need to. She could feel the weight of his presence changing. The counselor cleared her throat. "There have been reports, but nothing conclusive." Jonathan's voice was calm. Too calm. "How many reports?" Silence. Rachel spoke then, because the truth had waited long enough. 5. Jonathan turned slowly. 5. Rachel nodded. "Over 3 months?" The principal frowned. "Mrs. Monroe, this is not the time to—" Rachel cut in, still composed. "It is exactly the time." Jonathan looked at her fully now. Not as an employer, not as a man guarding his house, but as someone realizing the ground had shifted beneath him. "You knew," he said quietly. Rachel met his gaze. "Yes." The word landed between them. Heavy, irrevocable. Jonathan stood. "This meeting isn't over." The principal straightened. "Mr. Hale, we are following protocol." Jonathan smiled once. There was no warmth in it. "Then your protocol needs revision." Rachel watched him, stunned. This was not the man she had prepared herself to confront. This was someone else, someone awake. Outside in the parking lot, Jonathan stopped walking. "How long?" he asked. "Were you planning to tell me?" Rachel swallowed. "When I was sure." "Sure of what?" "That you would choose what was right over what was easy." Jonathan turned to her, pain sharp in his eyes. "And if I hadn't?" Rachel held his gaze. "Then I would have left." That answer hurt more than anger would have. They stood there, neither moving. The audience already knew what Jonathan did not yet allow himself to say, that the kindness had not been accidental, that the timing had not been random, that love had been growing in a space shaped by necessity. Back at the house, the air felt different, tighter, unfinished. Caleb noticed immediately. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. Jonathan crouched in front of him. "No, you didn't." Rachel watched, heart pounding. That night, after Caleb went to bed, Jonathan stood alone in the kitchen. Rachel hesitated in the doorway. "Jonathan," she said softly. He did not turn. "How long have you known who I was?" Rachel took a breath. "Before I applied." The truth was out now. There was no softening it. Jonathan nodded once. "So every conversation, every look, every moment was real," Rachel said quickly. "Just not innocent." Jonathan turned then, eyes searching her face. "I don't know what that makes us." Rachel's voice trembled for the first time. "Neither do I." Silence filled the room, not empty, charged. Jonathan spoke, slower. "You should have told me." Rachel nodded. "I know. And yet," he said, conflicted, "if you had, I wouldn't have listened." That landed, hard. Rachel stepped closer. "I didn't come for you, but I stayed because of you." Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, there was longing there, and fear. He said nothing else. Later, Rachel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She had crossed the line. There was no going back now. Down the hall, Jonathan sat on the edge of his bed, the house too quiet again. He realized then that the most dangerous thing Rachel had done was not entering his life under false pretenses. It was making him care enough to lose her. And somewhere between that thought and the dawn, the audience felt it too. If you are still here, it is because you recognize this moment, the one where something fragile and honest is forming, even though it might break. Stories like this stay with us because they remind us how much we risk when we choose to feel. The next day would demand a decision, and not everyone would walk away whole. The next morning arrived without permission. Jonathan stood at the kitchen counter, staring at a legal pad he hadn't written on. Across the room, Rachel moved quietly, packing Caleb's lunch the way she always did. Careful, unintrusive, as if nothing had shifted. Everything had. Jonathan watched her hands. Steady. Familiar. Too familiar for a woman he was no longer sure how to place in his life. "Rachel," he said. She paused, but didn't turn. "Yes? There's a board meeting this afternoon," he continued. "The school will be there." Rachel finally faced him. Her expression didn't ask for reassurance. It asked for truth. "And?" she said. "And I need to decide how far this goes." Rachel nodded once. "So do I." There it was, the line between them clearly drawn. Caleb entered the room, tying his shoes. "Are we late?" Jonathan looked at his son and felt the weight of time compress. "No," he said. "We're not." Dirt. At school, the tension was visible now. Whispers followed Rachel down the hallway. A polite distance formed around Eli, as if concern were contagious. Jonathan noticed everything. He noticed the way administrators avoided Rachel's eyes. He noticed the practiced smiles. He noticed how easily silence could be weaponized. During the meeting, the tone shifted. "We value our families," one board member said smoothly. Jonathan leaned back. "Then show it." The room stilled. "We've handled this internally," another added. Jonathan's voice was controlled, but it carried. "You handled it quietly." Rachel sat beside him, hands folded, heart pounding. This was the point of no return. If Jonathan protected the institution, she would lose him, but save her son. If he didn't, he would lose standing, influence, and comfort. The audience knew the truth already. Rachel had never come for power. She had come for protection. The chair cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale, perhaps discretion." "No," Jonathan said. "One word. Final." He stood. "Discretion ends when children get hurt." Rachel closed her eyes. That sentence cost him something. He felt it immediately. The subtle withdrawal, the careful glances, the understanding that alliances shift when control changes hands. After the meeting, Jonathan and Rachel stood outside, neither speaking. Rachel broke the silence. "You didn't have to do that." Jonathan shook his head. "Yes, I did." She searched his face. "And now?" Jonathan exhaled. "Now there are consequences." That night, the house felt heavier than before. Caleb sat on the couch, quiet again. Rachel noticed. She always did. "Hey," she said, sitting beside him. "Want to talk?" Caleb hesitated. "Are you leaving?" Jonathan froze. Rachel didn't answer right away. She glanced at Jonathan, then back at Caleb. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. Caleb swallowed. "I don't want things to go back to before." Jonathan felt the words hit somewhere deep. Later, when the house had gone still, Rachel stood by the door of the guest room, bag in hand. Jonathan appeared in the hallway. "You're leaving?" "Yes," she said. "When?" "Tonight?" Jonathan stepped closer. "Because of me?" Rachel met his eyes. "Because of us." The truth was simple. Staying now would blur lines that needed to be clear. She had chosen to protect her son. Now she had to protect herself. And him. Jonathan's voice dropped. "If you go, I don't know what happens next." Rachel's voice was steady, even as her chest ached. "Neither do I. But staying would make this wrong." Silence stretched between them. A silence full of everything they weren't saying. Jonathan spoke quietly. "I don't know what was real." Rachel answered without hesitation. The care was real. The feelings were real. The timing was complicated. Jonathan closed his eyes. She stepped past him, then stopped. "Jonathan," she said. He turned. "This was never about taking something from you." He nodded. "I know." Rachel opened the door. Jonathan didn't stop her, because stopping her would have been about fear, not love. As the door closed, Jonathan stood alone in the hallway, the absence returning in a new form. Not numbness. Loss. And somewhere beyond the quiet, the audience felt it too. That ache when the right choice hurts the most. If this story is touching something familiar, that moment where doing the right thing costs more than doing the easy thing, stay with it. Some stories don't give comfort right away. They give truth first. Jonathan went into Caleb's room later that night. Caleb didn't sleep. "She left," Caleb said. "Yes," Jonathan answered. "Is it because of me?" Jonathan sat beside him. "No, it's because of me." Caleb looked up. "Will she come back?" Jonathan hesitated. "I don't know," he said honestly. And that honesty was the beginning of something new. The house learned how to be quiet again. Not the old quiet, the one Jonathan had mastered after his wife died, but a sharper version, one that reminded him constantly of what had been there and wasn't anymore. Caleb felt it first. He still did his homework, still ate breakfast, still went to school, but he watched doors now, listened for footsteps that never came. Jonathan tried to fill the gap with presents. He left work earlier. He cooked dinners that were mostly edible. He sat through science videos and soccer highlights, nodding, asking questions. It helped, but it didn't replace what Rachel had brought into the house without ever announcing it. At school, things changed. Not quickly, not cleanly, but visibly. The boy who had been hurting Eli was removed from the classroom pending investigation. Meetings were no longer postponed. Words like procedure were replaced with accountability. Rachel noticed the difference immediately. Eli noticed it too. "They stopped," he said one afternoon, climbing into the passenger seat of her car. Rachel gripped the steering wheel. "Stopped what?" "Everything," he said. "They look at me now." Rachel blinked hard, the road blurring for a moment. That's how it should have been from the start. At the same time, consequences reached Jonathan. A donor withdrew support. A board seat became under review. Calls stopped coming. He expected anger. He expected regret. What he didn't expect was relief. One evening, as he cleared the dinner table, Caleb spoke without looking up. Rachel would have laughed at that. Jonathan froze. "At what?" he asked. Caleb pointed to the burnt edge of the chicken. "She said mistakes make food honest." Jonathan smiled despite himself. A small, fragile thing. "Yes," he said. "She did." Later that night, Jonathan sat alone in his office, scrolling through old emails he'd never answered. Somewhere between unread messages and abandoned drafts, he realized something uncomfortable. Rachel hadn't just protected her son. She had trusted him. Not his money. Not his influence. Him. And that trust had cost her everything she couldn't afford to lose. Meanwhile, Rachel struggled with absence in her own way. She missed Caleb's quiet observations. She missed the rhythm of the house. She missed Jonathan's restrained smiles, the ones that felt earned. but she didn't reach out. Love, she had learned, didn't mean entitlement. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, Jonathan received an email from the school. Final resolution attached. He read it slowly. Apologies. Policy changes. Oversight. Justice. Imperfect but real. Jonathan closed his laptop and leaned back, exhaling. He thought of Rachel immediately, not as someone to inform, but as someone to honor. He didn't call her. Instead, he showed up. The park near the school was quiet, dotted with late afternoon light. Jonathan spotted Eli first, kicking a soccer ball. He stopped at a distance. Rachel looked up. For a moment, neither moved. No anger, no relief, just recognition. Jonathan approached slowly, hands visible, like someone entering unfamiliar territory. "Hi," he said. "Hi," Rachel replied. Eli glanced between them. "Do you know each other?" Rachel smiled faintly. "Yes." Jonathan crouched. "You must be Eli." Eli nodded, cautious. "I'm Jonathan," he said. "I owe you an apology." Eli frowned. "For what?" "For not paying attention sooner." Eli considered this, then shrugged. "Okay." Children forgave faster than adults. Rachel watched, chest tight. Jonathan stood. "The school made changes, real ones." Rachel nodded. "I know." "Then you already know I didn't come to explain myself?" Rachel met his eyes. "Then why did you come?" Jonathan didn't answer immediately. He let the moment breathe. "I came," he said, "because some choices shouldn't end in silence." Rachel felt her pulse quicken. Jonathan continued, voice steady. "I lost things when I did the right thing, but I found something too." Rachel waited. "My son sees me now," Jonathan said, "and I see myself." The words weren't grand. They didn't need to be. Rachel swallowed. "That doesn't fix what was broken between us." Jonathan nodded. "I know." He paused, then said the one thing that mattered. "But I would choose it again." Silence followed. Not empty. Alive. Rachel felt it then, the moment the audience waited for. The choice. She could protect herself by walking away again, or she could choose something imperfect, earned, and real. Rachel spoke quietly. "If I come back, it won't be as an employee." Jonathan smiled, not relieved, not triumphant, just honest. "That's the only way I'd want you." They didn't touch. Not yet. Because some connections needed space to finish becoming themselves. And the audience knew. The end was close. Autumn arrived gently, like it understood it was stepping into something delicate. The trees near Jonathan's house changed first. Leaves softened into gold and rust, catching light in a way that made everything feel briefly forgiving. Rachel didn't move back in right away. That mattered. They chose slowness, not because passion was missing, but because respect had finally arrived. Jonathan met her outside the house the first evening she came over for dinner. Not as an employer. Not as a man expecting anything, just as someone waiting. "You didn't have to cook," Rachel said, noticing the effort immediately. Jonathan smiled. "I wanted to." Caleb hovered nearby, pretending not to watch too closely. Rachel stepped inside. The house felt different now, less guarded, more lived in. During dinner, they talked about ordinary things: school projects, a broken drawer, a neighbor's overly dramatic dog. Humor slipped in easily. Jonathan gestured toward the slightly crooked bookshelf. "I fixed that." Rachel tilted her head. "Define fixed." "It no longer falls," he said. "That's success." Rachel laughed, a real laugh, surprised and warm. Jonathan watched her, realizing something quietly important. He wasn't afraid of losing control anymore. After dinner, Caleb excused himself, giving them space without being asked. Jonathan noticed. He always noticed now. Rachel stood by the window, hands folded. "You've changed," she said. Jonathan joined her. "So have you." Rachel nodded. "I had to be brave longer than I wanted to." Jonathan turned to her. "I didn't deserve the trust you gave me." Rachel met his gaze. "No, but you earned it." There it was. The moment of truth didn't arrive with fireworks or declarations. It arrived with permission. Jonathan spoke softly. "I don't want to go back to who I was before you." Rachel inhaled. "Neither do I." They stood there, close enough to feel the warmth between them, far enough to choose it. Jonathan reached out, not to pull her in, but to offer his hand. Rachel took it. That was the moment the audience waited for. Not perfection. Not certainty. Choice. Weeks passed. Rachel didn't return as a caregiver. She returned as herself. She and Jonathan learned each other without roles to hide behind. There were disagreements, boundaries, awkward pauses. But there was also laughter. Real, unplanned, human. One evening, Caleb looked up from his homework and said casually, "You know, the house feels better now." Jonathan and Rachel exchanged a glance. Jonathan smiled. "It does," Rachel added gently, "because people feel safe in it." Jonathan nodded, understanding fully now. Later that night, after Caleb was asleep, Jonathan and Rachel sat on the couch, close but quiet. Rachel spoke first. "I didn't come here to fall in love," Jonathan replied without hesitation. "Neither did I." She looked at him. "And yet?" "And yet," he agreed. Jonathan rested his forehead against hers, not rushing anything. "This isn't perfect," he said. Rachel smiled softly. "No, it's chosen." That was enough. Outside, the leaves continued to fall, not because they were forced, but because the season had changed. And inside the house, something had finally settled into place. Not control. Connection. If this story stayed with you, if you found yourself hoping, smiling, or holding your breath at certain moments, we'd love to hear how it made you feel. And if you'd like to be part of a community that believes love can grow from difficult choices and quiet courage, consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Some stories don't end when the video does. They linger. And sometimes they change the way we see our own.